I'll just read the roll call. We have Mr. Howell here, we have Brandy, is it Pavlik, is that the proper pronunciation? Okay. We have Chris Fenton, Sean Cotton, Ahmed Ismail, and Roy Bishop. I'm sorry, Roy Rogers for some reason.
No, not him.
Okay, Dr. Roy Bishop. We'll go into the goals and purposes. And Mr. Cotton, you feel free to pitch in on this. Our goals for this committee is basically to streamline the budget function as opposed to the way it was last year. To work together, come up with a collaborative budget that we can do with a lot less drama, a lot less angst, and with more logic. And that's the reason I asked you to be here, and I'll chime in, Mr. Cotton.
That's perfect. I think I said better.
Okay, that's why we're here. Mr. Howell, it's up to you now in this Pavlik.
All right. So we were asked to put together an overview of the remaining ESSERS 3, ESSERS 11T, and 31O, 31N6 funds. These are grants that we're receiving through COVID relief funding. So we received the ESSERS dollars, ESSERS 2, now we're at ESSERS 3, ESSERS 11T, 31O, 31N6 funds. These are all funds that have come into our school district that we have used to support some of our student programming across the school district. So we'll give you kind of an overview of how much money we have in those funds remaining. We'll give you an overview of what these funds particularly can be used for, and then where we're at the end of this school year. Just know that this is a budgeting presentation. You know, they're not actuals. There's still things that we're adjusting from here and there, but we'll kind of explain that throughout the presentation.
Thank you.
All right. So the purpose is to provide an overview of the allocated expenditures from the non-reoccurring COVID relief funds. Now, we do receive a lot of grants in our school district, but they're reoccurring grants. You know, we receive them each year, like Title I grants, Title II, and those types of things. This is just the non-recurring grants, things that are going to be off the books at the end of the school year. It's going to specifically focus on ESSERS 3, ESSERS 11T, and then also 31O and 31N6. And then this information, as I stated, it's really, budget planning right now. So we're going to start with ESSERS 3. The purpose of those funds are to address the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on education. We're really using the money to support safe reopening of schools and address learning loss that took place due to the pandemic. We implement those strategies to meet the students' social, emotional, and academic needs. These are all the reasons why we are receiving these funds. The eligibility to use these funds, it's very flexible with a wide range of educational interventions. It can be used for targeting interventions, supporting or reducing class sizes, opening new sections, instructional coaching. Those are the types of things you can use ESSER $3 for. The reporting requirements, we are required to submit our purpose for the goal it's called the MIGE system, the Michigan Electronic Grant System that we support, submit our information into. Then we have a consultant that approves it, and then we are able to implement those funding sources. And then we also have to have a transparency report to the Board of Education. Last year, you may have remembered, we did a report, I think it was October timeframe. We're going to be doing it on November 28th of this year, just kind of explaining how those funds are interacting with some of the resources we've used. So we as a school district have allocated these ESSER $3 for instructional coaching in our school district, targeted interventions with culture, academic, and behavior support, and also we've used the ESSER $3 for reducing class size and reopening some new sections. And I'll go into more detail about that as we go further through the presentation. And if I could just have you guys just take notes if you have questions, I might answer questions throughout this presentation, and then at the end we can do a Q&A. ESSERS 11T funds are a little bit different than ESSER 3 funds. So ESSER 11T funds are ESSER funds, but they have some stipulations to those funds. They are targeting educational success for disadvantaged children in schools. 11T funds are only able to be used for economically disadvantaged students, students with disabilities, students of color that are not identified as Caucasian, English learners, students experiencing homelessness, migratory students, and also foster care students. So 11T funds are very specific to who you can use those funds for. It's less flexible than ESSERS 3. They have to be used to support a variety of different things. Two of the things are summer school programming and after points programming. Those are after school programming. So those are two areas that the funds can be used for. They're also used for academic assistance, reading and math foundation, intervention support, literacy coach support. They can be used for transportation services for our 11T students, which we use that during our summer programming and after school programming. And it's really aimed to bridge the educational disparities and promotes equitable opportunities for all students. This is language straight from the 11T requirements that we receive those funds for. The reporting requirements are the same. We have to enter into the MEG system, and then we get the approval to be able to deploy those funds and allocate those funds accordingly. And then we will be giving a continuity of service plan report on the 28th to the Board of Education as part of the requirements. So as a school district, what we did with these funds is we used them to allocate paraprofessionals for some academic and behavioral medical support for some of our students. This is a really an episodic support that happens every year. We have a certain amount of classrooms or students that need additional support. So we as a school district will look at ways to support that. We've supported that through the general fund in the past. This particular year, some of these funds were able to transfer into the 11T bucket of money because we were able to do that with the 11T funds. We also do academic interventions, individual support for students, academic learning center, academic assistance for different classrooms at the middle school, reading foundations at the middle school, math foundations, after points, summer points, transportation services, and we're also looking at ways to support professional development on trauma-informed instruction. So we're trying to allocate a portion of those funds to support maybe getting subs to have teachers get some different training to support some of the trauma-informed instruction that's taking place in the classroom. So now we're shifting outside of the ESSERS funds to these 31O funds. So 34O funds are established in school districts so that we can increase the number of psychologists, social workers, counselors, nurses providing service to a school district. Our district, we use the funds to support the hiring of nurses and also the hiring of some general education social workers in our school district. Those are the two things that we've done. This grant requires 100%, allowed us to pay for in 2022, all of the nurses that we had in our school district and some of the general social workers were paid 100% from this grant. The grant then has this tiered approach. So last year, the grant could only pay for 66% and the district had to come up with the rest of the cost. This year, we're only allowed to access 33% of the grant, and then the district pays for the rest of the cost. And then in year 4, if the districts or intermediate school districts feel that it's necessary, it fully has to be funded by the districts or the intermediate school district. This gets a little confusing because then we couple this grant with the 31N6 grant. So 31N6 has pretty much the same requirements as 31O, but this is a flow-through grant, so it goes from the state of Michigan to Wayne-Risa and then to our school district. So this is going to be a grant that I'll explain how much money we're receiving from that in a minute. These funds can be used to offset any remaining costs of 31O. So as the last slide stated, that 33% of the grant can go towards the hiring of nurses and social workers, and we have to pick up the rest. Well, actually, 31N6 can pick up the rest of those funds. And like I said, we are using the 31O funds and the 31N funds for social workers and nurses in our school district. And the 31N6, as of now, it's a one-time grant that we're flow through Wayne Research. There is a chance that we could get additional funding in future years. If Wayne Research applies for a grant, they're able to receive it, then they can forward to us, similar to other grants that we've had in the school district as well. So this is what 31N, 6, and 31O looks like. So the description, so we have a remaining budget in our 31O grant of $251,776. For 31N6, we're receiving $450,000 through this workflow grant from Wayne Research to us. Our staffing, that's a total of $701,776. Our total staffing for our nurses and our social workers is $832,191. So that's a shortfall of $130,416.
It's fully loaded.
Correct.
Thank you.
With that though, we're also applying for an additional funding grant. It's called 31AA. This is a grant you may have heard last year, 31AA. It also had a grant of 97, I think it was 97C. It's a 97 combined grant about safety. So they're taking those two grants, kind of putting them together and now calling it 31AA. That grant is due December 10th. We're applying for that. We'll receive funding from that grant, similar to how we have in the past. These funds can be used for hiring or contracting support staff for mental health needs, including but not limited to school counselors, nurses, psychologists, and social workers. This money can also be used to offset the $130,000 shortfall. So let's say we get $400,000 out of this grant. Of that, we will take it to pay for the shortfall of the $130,000. Then we'll have remaining a number of funds to be able to put towards some of these other things, so the social workers and nurses and so on and so forth. These funds need to be expended by September of 2025. So when we receive them, then we'll have till September of 2025 to pay for them. Is that understandable?
You said to pay for them, you mean to use them?
To use the funds,
Okay,
to use
so I make sure.
use the funds, yep. So some planning considerations with all of this information that we're receiving. So ESSERS 3, 11T, 31O, 31N6, these are, for the 2023-24, it's partially used for programs that are currently existing prior to funding availability. So sometimes we've used these funds to pay for things that we've already had in our district in the past. So it's called supplanting. So we're supplanting the funds into existing programming that we already have. We'll talk a little bit more about that when I show you kind of the full breakdown. Moving forward, our focus, we want to really move away from that supplanting piece and make sure that we're implementing grant funds based on the district needs. So what is our need for the school district? Let's take a look at how much money we have, and rather than supplanting, how can we use those funds to really support what they're intended to be used for? And then ongoing collaboration, not that we're doing anything wrong, we're able to do it this way. It allows us to supplant, but we want to look at it a little bit differently. Ongoing collaboration and planning to determine district needs and assessing any grant funding utilization will be kind of our focus. Now for the slide that I think really will be the most interesting. This is the summary slide. So our description is the ESSER 3 funds, the 11T funds, the 31O, 31N6 funds. Right here, this kind of is our starting amount for those funds. So remaining, what we have for the remainder of this year, we have the $1,433,720 of ESSER 3. ESSER 11T, we have $2,149,667. And of that 31O, 31N6 was the $701,776, which I already kind of explained on that one chart that showed what we have in place. 832 is what we're spending, and that shortfall.
That starting amount was as of July 1?
Correct. Yeah, we were budgeting for this year, fiscal year.
Thank you.
So this is what we paid with the general fund in prior years. So some of the things we've supplanted into programming already. So prior years, before these grants, we spent about $1 million usually for some of those courses at lower class sizes that, kind of consolidate, sections so that we can make a section whole, to have academic assistance, math foundations, reading foundations, those classes. ESSER's 11T, about just under $1 million as well, that we would usually use to support learning, prior to any of these grants that we've had. So that comes about $2 million or so. Of these funds, there are some things that we've done that are only in place because of the grant funding, and that is the total amount. Now this $832,191, that's a big chunk of it, and that is the nurses and the general and social workers, and that's coming from that 31N. So if we, total remaining, wanted to have everything next year the same exact way that we have it this year, excluding getting the money from these grants, it would be about a $4,415,583 difference to our operating budget. If we wanted to just do parts of this, we would find ways to maybe do parts of this. If we wanted to, all the things that were in place because of grant funding, or we have to make a decision that we wouldn't do those things and have this, $2 million kind of deficit to our, or not deficit, but just change to the operating budget, and we would have to find a way to make up that $2 million difference of these grants. I will tell you, there are things in here that we're doing as a school district that are great. I mean, all of it that we're using is great, but there are things that we would love to be able to keep, but the reality might not be that we can keep it. So we have to make those decisions and have those conversations, and I think this is a good first start. So the next slide, which I'm just not gonna go to it just says questions. We'll just leave it up here and we'll allow you to kind
This is the
of take it
magic
in
slide.
and
So-
we can open it up for questions at this time.
So Steve,
Keith.
I'm sorry, my brain is going nuts today, Keith, much sucrose. So Keith, in other words, if we were to say we no longer have the federal funding, and we need to cut what we've paid for with federal funding, we're cutting 4.4. Am I reading that right?
Correct.
Okay. And if last year we didn't have federal funding, and we wanted to keep programs that we had, we would have taken $2 million out
That
of
is
fund
correct.
equity, okay?
That is correct.
If we roll into next year and keep everything, our fund equity takes a hit of 4.4 million. Okay.
Or we have to cut something else and keep it.
Right.
Or kept, right.
Something's getting cut, okay, thank you.
I know it's a lot to digest. So just curious what questions you might have, what I can help you
Was
with.
the 31-0 all supplanting?
31-0?
Staff, everything was supplanting?
No, 31-0 is in addition. We've never had that before. That's
No,
on
I
this
mean, the
list.
staff and supported by 31-0, did we have all of that staff before, or did we hire anybody under 31-0?
Those were all hired.
Everybody was
because of
hired.
Those are
the
add-ons.
the nurses and general ed social workers. Those were in
And do we
addition.
have everybody who was hired year 1, or are there people in there who were hired year 2 and year 3?
Some were hired year 2 and year 3, some were still here from year 1.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Some people who were from the original cohort that were hired in, and some people who went to other positions, so we had to rehire those people and at a different date.
Are we
Even
still,
other
are we
positions.
still replacing those positions? If there's any leaves?
We have previously, maybe a couple of months ago, but we don't have anybody to fill the positions now currently, no.
I wanted to
I can go
to
back
the-
to any slide too.
Well, I was just, a question of the paid with general fund prior to receiving grants. So that $2 million, that covered existing people prior to any ESSER's money
Yes.
coming in? So
Yes.
that covered some of our existing social workers, and would that be accurate?
Not our social workers, that would be our academic assistance classes, our reading foundations classes, our math foundation classes at the middle school. Any section that we chose to add additional FTE to because we wanted to lower class size or add additional sections to support learning, to make a lower class size, those are things that we put into that had prior to the grant funding.
I would have loved to see the slide last year. I mean, just to know, and maybe I missed it, Keith, but I don't remember ever being told that, hey, by the way, we're taking $2 million of ESSER's funding, not for new things, but just to cover things that we would have taken out of the general fund. I can't remember that being translated to me.
I thought it was all new.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I had no idea we were patching up old.
And other schools,
This,
Did the
other
same
schools
thing.
are doing
Yeah.
the same thing.
Oh, I know that, no question about it. I just didn't know. I mean, because realistically, that was a $2 million Band-Aid that we put on maintaining programs we already had.
so moving forward, in preparing for the next budget, you know, we got, every year stays, we got 4.4 plus whatever else is out there. And we have to determine that because we haven't started pulling those numbers together, but.
Yeah, it's a minimum of 4.4.
Yeah, I'll give an example, somebody, Michelle, I think, or somebody told me that the cost of, was that you, Michelle, the cost of, referees and,
Oh, I did, yes.
yeah, referees and, associated with, athletics is going way beyond the cost of living. So there's gonna be, in essence, a shortfall there that we have to look at, so.
Is that what created our difference in the audit of 260-some thousand in athletics?
No, this is for the future.
Different thing.
There's always a deficit in athletics.
No, I'm talking about the difference between the audit. The audit picked up a spread.
Oh, yeah,
I don't,
yeah,
462,000.
we have a breakdown of that.
Thank you.
But my point is, 4.4, I'm kind of going that's a minimum. Now, maybe there's nothing else to add to it, but we're looking at a minimum of 4.4.
4.4 in cuts. Wow.
Right, did we find a structural deficit of an additional million at the finance committee?
Well, what we have to look at, the good news, as I mentioned there, was that our enrollment looks stable. And we, of course, we don't know yet what the per pupil amount is gonna be. And last year, we determined a 4% increase. 4%, so let's say we get another 4%, increase of the state portion. We're not gonna get any more on our hold harmless. So technically, there'll be, if it's a typical year, there'll be some shortfalls there. And that's our, the goal of the next while is to determine that amount, if and what is the amount added to that 4.4. And if we get a big donation, we'll knock it down.
As long as it's unrestricted.
Yeah.
So Chris, looking forward, and Keith and Roy and Brandy, looking forward, if we want to work backwards and say, okay, the end of May, we want budget done. Okay, what would be our finish to start schedule working backwards in your minds?
Well, typically, these guys could probably answer better than I do in the olden days. Probably, we're starting heavy in, really February, working on the budget for a June adoption. So, I don't know what the practice was in the past year.
Yeah, I think we would need to talk, of course, internally to see, okay, what supports, and we need to do a needs assessment to make sure that the things that we're doing and we're having them are actually seeing results within our students. So we need to talk about that. We also need parameters, that we make sure that we know exactly what the task is that we're looking to accomplish throughout all of our conversations. And then we need to know, okay, from the state and the Senate, what is the actual money gonna be as far as for the student aid for this year, and then we can figure out exactly how we make it work.
I think we're also looking to help create the parameters here at this committee as well, and then work back and forth with the board on that. So we're gonna look to the administration for a lot of help with the creation of those parameters.
Typically, I think your parameters were adopted in January.
Right.
And I guess it still can be done in January, we just gotta speed the process up.
Right.
I guess the only thing I would add is specifically to grants, I'm guessing we'll probably find out more information between December and February if we're gonna receive some of these other grants too.
Yeah, I think the way we have to approach this, I think it would make sense, and you guys are the money people here, but it would seem to me that in the private sector, we'd approach it as making a conservative estimate of what our income's going to be, build it off of that, and if we have to make an adjustment on the GAA, you know, the first time around, we'll have to make an adjustment, you know.
And we're gonna be doing an adjustment for the December board meeting, GAA number 1,
Okay,
which will be enrollment, fund equity.
is it a happy one or a sad one?
No, I think that'll be a happy one.
Okay,
The per pupil count and all that, so. But, you know, moving forward, we have to make assumptions what the future for 24-25 is gonna be in terms of the governor. You know, you can do a couple scenarios, the high and low in between, but, looks like.
that's a good way to go, Chris.
We're gonna be facing at least, we wanna, you know, and we have to make an assessment of what some of these programs, like Keith said, some of the ones that only in place of the grant funding, we might wanna continue.
In which case we'd have to supplant and this, something else gotta go.
Right.
Okay,
Or we, I won't say it.
go ahead,
Well, we could reduce fund equity,
right,
but I don't think we're gonna do that.
yeah,
I mean, we could reduce fund equity down to really 4.5 million,
and then what?
and then just move on. And then you're faced with the same dilemma sooner or later.
Right, that's just kicking the can forward. Okay.
So the next step is that supports and needs assessment for all these programs. I guess that's really comprehensive for the entire district though, isn't it?
Have to be.
When you mean comprehensive, you mean like us looking at what's working, what's not working, you mean?
Well, it's everything. I mean, if we're going to say that some of this stays, something goes.
Something else is going.
So we have to figure that out. I mean, so it's a comprehensive needs assessment over the
Yeah.
entire district.
And I think we would wanna talk to our staff members, especially our principals about that, because I think some of the things we've implemented have done great things for, not only our culture and climate, but also student behavior and this academic achievement. When I think about us, before 31-0, we never ever had an opportunity to have general education social workers. So coming out of the pandemic, we were seeing behaviors that we had never seen before. So I think you're spot on. We wanna be able to talk to the right people to see what exactly is working within buildings, prioritize those, and then bring that back to the board.
We never had nurses either.
Never had nurses before this. Well, I take that back. I think we did. I think like 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
right, that we
Back
had
in my day,
nurses.
Not since I've been.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
We had full-time nurses at the high school.
Right.
But that was, we lost those back when I was here, so.
Are these 31-0 nurses, do they see students or are they administrative?
They work collaboratively with our building administrators and teachers, but they also work with specific students.
I'll say it a little different. They don't work necessarily specifically with students. What they do for us is they help us design some of our systems. So before we had district nurses, it was our secretaries and our clerks who were adhering to the students that came into the office that needed something. Well, now we're creating some of those systems. We're getting our policies up to code and making sure students across the board are being serviced appropriately and correctly. So they're really more on the side of creating those systems. So whether they're here or not, then we can make sure that we're maintaining safety for all of our students. But are they seeing students that are coming in on a day-to-day because they hurt their finger and giving them ice? No, because they don't have the capacity to be in every building like that every day. So we've used them in ways in which we can have the biggest impact from them, seeing that we only have 3.
So Chris, approaching this, I'm going back in time a bit, are we then looking at something, a model where we take the building student count and say that's that building's budget? What do you wanna keep, what do you wanna not keep? How are we gonna
Well,
approach
the
this?
first go around, we wanna take all those variables, throw them into a spreadsheet and say, what are we looking at? 'Cause you just look at, let's say, in essence, the state increases us 4%. But let's say our utilities go up, 5 or 6%, there's a shortfall. So we have to look at all those factors, factor them in, see what's the outcome, and then we can go down through. And what we're planning to do is look at student ratios per building to see student staff ratios, sorry. In each building, you see what the comparisons are. But having said that, a particular school might need, based on test scores, based on the curriculum, might need more staff to address those student needs. So it's not just a simple formula, everybody's gonna be at X number per student, so.
That's what held that a little bit harder. I think we talk a lot about ratios, and ratios are great, but ratios do not equate to students and what they actually do on a day-to-day basis. So when we talk about needing to address the needs of certain buildings, those needs look different. And we have to make sure that we are okay with that. So that might not be met within a ratio
Right.
of a 21.2 or 23. We have to really take a deep dive to see what does this building need and how do we equate that? And that might not equate to each building getting the same thing.
So, in other words, if you're taking a look at it under that scenario, I mean, it would seem to me that you would take your student count, take your prorate out, your administrative costs, take that, what's left, and give that to the building in their budget and give them the flexibility to spend it where they think is best for their students. Does that not work?
Well, it can work, but we've done that in the past, but,
I mean, they know best, they're in the trenches, they know where, I would think they would know where they want their.
well, and I think that's how, what Roy referred to earlier, we have to work collaboratively with these folks to sit down, and they're all aware that we're gonna be faced with a shortfall. I'm pretty sure.
So then when you approach them with that, what do you tell them the shortfall is for their building?
Well, I don't tell them a shortfall for the building,
Okay.
I tell them a shortfall for the district. We have to look at it district-wide and come up with solutions if we wanna save some of these programs, and we're gonna have to cut something else somewhere. And that includes central office, you know, all the staffing,
Right.
custodial engineers, everybody's in the same, part of the same team. We have to look at it in a totality.
Right. But I mean, you mentioned a great point earlier, because utilities go 5%.
Yeah.
They're up, that's gone, that money's gone.
And our buildings, despite all the improvements, some buildings spend more on utilities than others.
Right.
So I don't think we can punish a building because it has newer, better, faster HVAC systems than an older one.
Well, I guess my goal, thinking out loud here, is to come up with something that's equitable for all the buildings. And to frankly tap into the principals and find out what their priorities are, because everybody's not gonna have everything according to this.
Can I actually elaborate on that? What does that mean to be equitable for all buildings?
In other words, the principal is going to have a feeling for what they value in their programs. You've got 4.4 million to cut. Whoever you guys decide to allocate that amongst buildings, ultimately, I think the principal should be the one that says, hey, you know, this, and this are imperative that I have, something may not be. And I would look to them for their guidance on that.
So it sounds as if potentially maybe we're gonna work with this committee, Sean, I heard you say that earlier, we're gonna come together and think on what that round number could be that we need to get to. And then you're gonna allow us the opportunity to be able to work with building principals
Right.
to see exactly what they need in their buildings and to be able to bring that back to you.
I expect to have them come here as well, to the budget committee. And that's something we've talked about, is having
So when you,
administrators come here and talk to us about their budgets.
so when you say, you mean the actual administrator, like, so like a Pierce principal come and say, here's what we're looking to be able to do at Pierce, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. That might give,
We've done that in the past, right?
Yeah, we used to do when I first joined.
that might give some principals some pause. I'm just being honest to put that out there, so if there's somebody who wants to do it differently, I'm open for them to do it differently, and just come in front of us and kinda like explaining their budget.
Well, that's the way you go back in time, Chris, if you'll recall, principals would come with their budgets, we'd go through them, and that's how the budgets were presented.
We did site-based budgeting at one time, then we got rid of it. Site-based budgeting is very difficult when you have a consistent $4.5, $5 million shortfall.
I totally.
Back in those days, we were, the thing that helped us then, we were on a upward slope in enrollment.
Right.
So we knew we were getting extra dollars for extra kids, and that always was the flaw in site-based budgeting, was it works great on the upswing, it doesn't work great on the downswing. Now, hopefully, we're leveling off here a bit. Now, if we're gonna lose another 230, 250 students, whatever, you know, I don't think it works real well.
I guess I'll say it one other way. I think we're in a very pivotal time within Grosse Pointe Public School System. And I think throughout the budget process last year and this year, I think there's a lot of feelings. I think we need to be careful of those feelings. I think we're in the people business. So I guess I would ask for consideration for our building principals, that maybe we don't put them on the spot per se for them to have to come in to explain that budget piece. Because if they explain it to us and then potentially we go back to this and say, I think this people are different, that might create a certain amount of feeling with the principals. So maybe we look for a way in which how we can do it where we're not in a way putting them on the spot for them to explain what their budget is versus talking about potentially what some of their needs may be. I'm just wondering how we can do it a little bit differently so that we're not putting like on the spot to explain something. Maybe that's just me thinking out loud about that, but I just wanna make sure that we're doing it in a way where we're not like putting a lot of feelings into the room about the budget process. Cause we often talk about budget, we're trying to talk about people, but at the same time it equates to people. I think that's hard, especially for our building principals, to talk about, we don't, I wanna say it the right way. When they prioritize their needs, we don't want them to say, we don't need this person, or we don't want them to do this. I never want a principal to have to stand up here and say, I feel this way about this particular person or this particular program. I would like to do that for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I'd like to hear is I'd like to hear from the building principals on these budgets and what's important to them. I understand what you're saying, but at the end of the day, we're gonna have to take care of $4.4 million. And I don't wanna not hear from them at some point, either through reports or something, or a collaborative process. We could work on how to make that process as, smooth as possible. I think that's why we have this committee, but at the end of the day, we have to work through a very large structural deficit that will be here no matter what. Plus, I think we all know we're coming into a contract negotiation next year as well, so I don't think, we have to take that into account as well. You're talking about utilities going up, some of the largest expenses will go up, and so we have to look into that too. But I just wanna make sure that we hear from all of our leaders in the district on that somehow through the process, so we can work through that to make it as smooth as possible. I just think at some point we should have, maybe it's just high school, it's high school and middle school. And talking to you guys, the elementary schools have less impact, I think, in their programming, what they can and can't do. But I'd like to involve as many of our leaders as possible, and I think that they could probably help make the hard decisions.
I appreciate that, because it sounds like you gave us a little bit of clarity there, where we just wanna hear from principals, but it could have looked different.
However we can work through the process, but I do think that we're going to have a very robust process. That's, that number there is one of the reasons of the impetus for this committee. It's a large number.
Sounds like it's the low end of the large number.
Yes.
Could be, most, yeah.
And again, as you said, I was told it was all new programs, and so that $2,002,000 is a large surprise.
Yeah. Yes, it could be.
Now, back to the site-based budgeting for a moment. This goes back a way. One of the quote-unquote problems with it was, especially when you get a small school, we'll look at the elementary, there's not much flexibility. Right. You got a principal, maybe a secretary, not maybe, you got a secretary, and then you got some classroom assistants, you got a couple custodians. Well, what happened was they had to cut, I'm gonna make up a number, 50,000, so everybody got rid of the custodian. Well, it's not real practical. It was an easy way, but you've got, how many staff members, you got 25 staff members sitting around a table. Now you're looking at the person you're gonna cut. It gets real difficult doing it that way. Not that it's any different than middle school or high school, for that matter.
Are there any plans for how to cut this? I was told there were, but.
Yeah, I thought there was the last year when we were talking about this, Dr. D made it sound like there was a game plan for handling this. Do you guys have that?
I haven't found it under game plan in the files. I'm being facetious, I should. But no, I don't know about it.
Is there anything you know, Dr. Bishop, or?
No, I don't know about a game plan per se, but I think like moving forward, I think we need to, like I said before, I think we need to have the right conversations. And we need to talk to our building leaders and talk about what our needs are and look at how we can do some things a little bit differently. Cause you're right, that number in red is a little concerning.
So in other words, the bottom line, I mean, if you're looking at this in most simplistic terms, each of the buildings has to take a 4% cut.
Well, and some organizations, including schools, will do that, so, you know, we got, what, $100 million, and, cutting 10% is $10 million, cutting is 4.4%.
Right.
You know, it's not that easy to do, because you've got fixed costs, et cetera. But I think, what the next step for us, for the administration, including the good Dr. Stanley over there, is to sit down and let's look at those assumptions.
Map out our fixed costs.
Right, let's look at all our assumptions, let's lay out a projection, and it's probably gonna be north of 4.4.
Yeah, cause I mean, realistically, Chris, if you just take purely your fixed costs, add increases that you can, you know, feel you're gonna have with utilities, maintenance, things like that, those aren't going anywhere. And chances are they're not going down.
And
I mean, that comes off the top of the number, then what's left is what you've got to play with for cuts.
And that raised the discussions over, in future years, maybe looking at a different way to look at the sinking fund than just on mill. Cause then you can lower some of that support service cost. It's not gonna get you 4.4 million.
So how do you wanna proceed with this?
Well, I think the next step is get all our assumptions down, at least get an initial stab of what it looks like, get all the principals involved. We were at a meeting just with them last week, and I think someone brought up, well, it's gonna be we're looking at another $4.5 million cut. Well, you know, and that was without looking at all the details.
So it's not a secret to anybody, because nobody wants to hear it.
No one wants to do it.
Okay.
But, and again, school districts all across the state who got this money are in the same predicament. They have to, and some of them handle it properly, and some of them have bigger fund equities.
Well, some of them stashed a lot of it in fund equity from what I've heard.
Right,
At least
you
what
got,
came
you
up with
got 20% sitting in fund equity, it's a little easier to do. Down the road someplace, you still gotta face the reality, you gotta cut it.
Right.
If you wanna maintain X percentage, and our goal is to get our fund equity up a bit, and there again, so just looking at that, let's say this is the only thing, and we want to get our fund equity up to, I don't know, 12%, something else has to come out.
This is gonna be 7 million.
And it goes back to what Dr. Bishop said earlier about our budget parameters. We're comfortable with the 9.8 million fund equity or whatever it is. That's one assumption.
Well, I think the thing we have to do, at least, you know, I'm just talking for myself, I think the thing we have to do is get a list by building of what that is. And we have to give that to the principals and say, okay, let's assume, just from a mechanic standpoint, assume that gets cut across the board, okay? Just for them to get a feel of, okay, if this was the way it was being done, what would I cut? Because it's ultimately their building, they know it best as far as what they need for their buildings. And, I think the sooner we do that, better. I don't think, forget about what we're getting from the state, you know, this is right here, right now.
Oh, I understand that, but we have to make some realistic general assumptions about,
Oh, your operating, your overhead expenses, I get that.
So that 832,031 is it correct to state that we've agreed that we have to continue that funding no matter what?
We haven't made that assumption.
We have not made that guarantee.
But that, in order to receive 310 funding, you had to make a statement like that to the state.
We're gonna make a considerable effort to try to be able to do it, yeah.
And has anybody asked our school attorney what happens if we don't?
Mhm.
I can't tell from the FAQ on the state side. it's something I think we need to look into and see what happens if you don't continue that program.
I can ask that question.
I appreciate the time you guys all put into this, it's a real eye opener, a real eye opener.
Just so I'm clear on like next steps, and like, I know you put some things out there, Mr. Finn talked about looking at our assumptions, creating a projection, talk about some of the fixed costs that we have, taking a look at what's actually in this $4.4 million bucket, and then talking to our principals about what's in that bucket.
Right. I mean, I think the thing to do is to talk to them of this bucket, here's what's in your building. You know, I mean, I think we need to see that chart, or like list, and say, this building has this building has that, this building has this, and we know, I mean, if you know that your utilities are going up 5%, you know what your last year's utilities were, you know what those other costs are, and whatever's left is what we have for those variable expenses.
Other than the teachers, there were teacher leaders that were hired through the ESSER 3 funds, correct?
Instructional coaches.
Instructional coaches, are there other staff outside those instructional coaches that are inside any of these grants?
Not any longer. We had, was it 6 instructional coaches?
6.
And we're down to 1. One of the reasons why some of these things have shifted a bit is because we went from 6 instructional coaches that were paid out of ESSER 3 to 1 instructional coach. We also condensed the intervention program that we had at the elementary level. It was called PTSS. It was built into the special schedule. If you remember, through budget reductions, that was about a $190,000 reduction. That has been removed. There's still a small component of that in here, but it's not as robust as it was. I think it's probably about $150,000 different from what we were spending last year at this time. So that was all monies that we were pulling from ESSER 3 that are now not in ESSER 3 anymore, so we use that money to supplant other programming.
Or something got bumped.
Something got bumped. So when you ask, why is this kind of shifted from last year, that is some of the reason why. Because we were using it to pay for things that weren't going to be in our school district in the future. Instructional coaches, unless we found other funding for it, or the MTSS time, unless we found other funding for it. When we had the parameters put in front of us last year, that was one of the things we kind of shifted away, because those teachers knew that the program was gonna go away, there were some open positions, they kind of selected those positions, and we just needed to fill it. And then we used the ESSER's money for other things.
That's for this year's budget.
Correct.
So is it possible that some of that doesn't pertain to a structural deficit, the 4.4 million?
No, because we're still pulling that from the general fund, we're paying it out of, rather than the general fund, we're paying it out of the ESSER 3 funds now.
I'm just wondering if we have somewhat of a windfall because of that we didn't account for. I think it might be something to look into.
I'm saying, again,
We can look into it, based off of,
If we didn't budget it, because I didn't,
my diet was specific to these 3, grant funded, sources.
I just don't remember anything in the budget that said to move some funds into the general fund from ESSER's. And so I'm just wondering if there is less of a structural deficit because of that. That just might be unaccounted for.
We can take a look at that.
We can take a look at it.
Yeah.
So just 1 instructional coach, and 3 nurses are the only staff contained within these grants.
No, general and social workers.
Those are also in the 31-0?
They're
That's the
31-0.
11-2.
They're in 31-0.
What number of social workers do we have under that 31-0?
3.
3, okay. And that's in addition to, do you know how many we have? One of the things that I had heard, and I mean, I don't know the accuracy of it, but I had heard that there were some buildings that had the social worker at very high caseloads, and then there were other buildings where a social worker might be in the building all day but only had 3 cases. I don't know if that's accurate, I'm just saying that's something I was told at some point. Have we done a needs assessment to see if we're using the social workers we have in the most, I mean, obviously, if a social worker only had 3 cases, if that were factual, I'm not saying it does, but if that were the case, you know, it would make sense that, you know, we could certainly manage caseloads differently.
I can tell you from working with general education social workers, from when they were hired in the position to now, there's no general education social worker in any of our buildings that only services 3 kids. Like that's not even possible with the needs that we have in our district right now. It's like, that's not even, we have some that are split between multiple buildings. We have some in our most at-risk buildings that are servicing students. And I guarantee you, if I went to some of those principals right now and said, how's it going? They would say, can I have another one? I need another one. But I don't think any general education social worker is only seeing 3 kids.
So we don't have a social worker that, let's take our elementary schools for instance, that each has one that's there for the day, or we do have people that are traveling?
We have some that are traveling. So for instance, we have one that's shared between Defer and Pierce. Because they're right across the street from each other, so they're shared there. Then we have one that's at Mason, we have one that's at Monteith, and we have one that's at Parcells, and then we have 4 throughout the district. I can guarantee you, each one of those locations has more than 3 kids on their caseload. I think we have our next steps. So that's good as far as what we need to be to do. Any questions we can answer for you at this time before we adjourn? Or we gotta do public comments, sorry.
Yeah, public comments. No, I'll be interested, you know, once you guys sit down and brainstorm what methodology you come up with for handling this. You know, that's gonna be the interesting, for me to understand how we get in there, and how's it fair to everybody, you know? So, okay, any other comments? Once, twice. Any public comments? Go right ahead.
I'm a teacher at Felder, Grosse Pointe Park, district parent. Question about, funding from the state. Do we yet know the full scope of funding that we're gonna get from Lansing?
No,
Okay,
I mean, for 24, 25,
for this school year?
well, this school year we have, yes.
You do?
The per pupil amount is, it went up,
$458, I think.
but not for 24, 25, and that typically doesn't come till, you know, the House will propose a number, the Senate proposes a number, the governor proposes a number, they get together, and then they make numbers up.
Okay, so my question is just pertaining to this shortfall. Like, is this still accurate given what the state has done for breakfast and lunch reimbursements? Does this factor into the attrition rate within the district? Like, what other factors, is this the final number, or are there other factors that have to be considered?
This is only based off of those 3 particular grant sources. The ESSER's 3, ESSER's 11T, and then 30 O, 30 land.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else? Once, twice? Okay, thank you. Okay, public comments done. Any committee member comments? Once, twice? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you. Thank you for your efforts.